Hey, welcome to Christ the Lord Clearwater's weekly message. I'm Pastor John Backus here in our studio in Clearwater, Florida, where we share the good news of Jesus on the Gulf Coast. Today we're going to be joining Christians around the world in asking ourselves, what child is this that was born to us in Christmas? What's his significance? In a way, you could say we're going to have a manna moment together. A manna moment. This idea has its origin in the Old Testament, in the history of the Jewish people. They were just redeemed from slavery in Egypt and on their way to the Holy Land. God provided divine food for them in the form of manna, something the world had not seen before. And so in the Hebrew language, they called it manna, which means, what is it? It's a question when you encounter something significant and want to know its meaning, its nature. What is it? I had manna moments when I and my family moved to Florida from the Midwest. I saw this sticker, Oakle, and wondered, what's the significance? Oh yeah, it's Florida upside down, so it means somebody's a local, not just a tourist. I noticed in my backyard these cool-looking spiders, which I didn't know. What is it? A manna moment. Well, it's an orb weaver, I later learned. I had never seen in person this moss, which I later learned was Spanish moss, hanging from the live oak trees. My manna moment was, what is that stuff? What's it called? Christians around the world have manna moments when Christmas comes and we hear the history of the nativity story, and then we have to ask, what was so significant about these events that happened? It's what caused the lyrics of the hymn, "What child is this?" to be penned and sung. This was on the mind of the Apostle Paul, an early Christian missionary, a representative of Christ as an apostle, a Bible author. He wrote in Galatians chapter 4 to an early Christian church, "When the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship." This part of the Bible was written to help his readers understand what the significance of the birth of Christ was. What is this? A manna moment. Paul's words began with the phrases, "When the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman." Paul here is referring to history, well-known history, that is documented by the investigative reporter, the Bible author, Luke. With these words, he's acknowledging the fact that the Christian story of hope is based on real-world coordinates. And if you identify what happened at those coordinates, you can find proof of divine care, that God is interested in you and your life story, your future. That's what coordinates do. They lock us into a specific place in space-time. We've got X and Y coordinates. Go this direction and then go that far up and then meet me at this time. For example, you might visit our congregation. You'd find us roughly at the intersection of Montclair, the X-coordinate, Hercules Avenue, the Y-coordinate, and join us at 10 a.m., which you could call the Z-coordinate. If you know those places, those coordinates, then you can locate us in real-world events. In the Christmas history, we have these coordinates from the Gospel of Luke. In those days, that is, the days of Caesar Augustus, a man that we know a lot of. We even know what he looks like from the art of the day. His lifespan roughly covered 30 years before Christmas and 30 years after. Caesar Augustus issued a decree. We knew about some of his legislative policy, administrative platform that he was standing on. So it was in that Z, that time coordinate, that Joseph and Mary came from Nazareth to Bethlehem and Ephrathah, the one that was the birthplace of King David. These are the coordinates for the Christmas story. Now, as Christians, we love the fact that we know this history really well. Just think, what if we had no Christmas coordinates at all? Like, how real is something with no place in space-time? That's the realm of mythology or fictional narrative like Santa Claus. If you want to establish that Santa Claus is real, people say things like, "Yeah, we spotted the sleigh flying over Tampa International Airport on Friday night about 10:30. They give him coordinates, but without coordinates, there's no real link to factual events. And even the hope-filled message of Christianity without actual coordinates would just be a hope-filled story, but you'd have no real reason to believe it had a significant impact on your life that you can count on. The beauty of encountering the Christmas history again each year is that the Christmas history is empirical evidence of God's impact. You can trace not only the prophecies that predicted it prior to the birth of Christ, but you can trace the impact of these real world events in literature, in architecture, in maps, in religious philosophy. You can trace it all the way back from our current time to that X, Y, Z coordinate location in Luke chapter 2. So the Christmas church for Christians is about two amazing truths this special time of the year. One is that we know the nativity, the birth history of this special Christ figure. But even though that's the heart of the Christmas Eve story, what's even more amazing isn't just that we know when Christmas was and what happened, but the significance of that baby. So in these days after Christmas, usually in January of the year, we focus not just on the nativity events, but on the incarnation, the significance of who this newborn baby was. That's what Paul did when he wrote to the church in Galatia. In Galatians chapter 4, he said, when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, divine being come into humanity through the birth of through the Virgin Mary. He then states the purpose: born under the law, under the obligation to keep moral imperatives and mandates, to redeem those under the law. Galatians 4 and 5. Paul wanted his readers in Galatia to explain that Jesus came to this world to live and die under the same rules of those he redeemed, who were in trouble or condemned by moral rules. These moral rules are so important because they're a standard of good that Christians call holiness, that God cares about justice too much to just let people off the hook when they have moral flaws. They show signs and symptoms of evil, and they carry out consequences that are twisted or wrong, iniquities and trespasses. God cares about justice, about right and wrong, too much to just let people off the hook for their behavior. He holds us accountable to his perfect standards of morality. But God also cares about us too much to leave us on the hook, stuck in the consequences of our moral behavior, lost in the human condition. So what does God do? That's what incarnation is all about. And we have our manna moment, our what is this, what child is this, when we understand how Jesus came to address God's commitment to justice and us, which we would call law and gospel. When God came to address the wickedness in the human heart and the things that are twisted in our mind and our motivations, God didn't just look at wrong behavior in our human story and kind of brush it away, say, somebody's got to deal with that, somebody's got to pay for that. And he didn't just do what somebody might do if they need a payment. They just color a new $20 bill with a crayon and say, you know what, I'll just kind of make up a solution to my debt. In Christianity, in the story of Christ, redemption is not just theoretical or philosophical. The story of Jesus isn't just a nice, inspiring story about a good man who made sacrifices for his friends in some fictional parable. These events happen in real XYZ coordinates to solve a real problem with a real payment. Forgiveness is not fake. It's not God just speaking into the world and saying, well, there's wrong stuff, I'm just going to act like wrong stuff doesn't matter. But in a system of holiness where accountability matters and you can't just pretend bad doesn't exist, forgiveness involves the forfeiture of life for those who ruin life. The book of Hebrews explains it this way. It says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Without the forfeiture of life, there must be the forfeiture of life for those who ruin life. Now in Galatians, Paul was writing in the Bible to people who thought they already had a payment to deal with their moral debt to God because they had been part of Old Testament Jewish kosher living laws and the ceremonial religious practices of that pre-Christ era, which of course involved animal sacrifice. There were also other means of sacrifice like enduring painful boundaries in life, kosher living laws, swearing off certain types of pleasures, or even the seal of circumcision, which was the rite of the physical marking, the procreative organ of men. And it was thought that these sacrificial systems, either of animals or of sacrifice of some form of self, is the payment system we need to get right with God. After all, didn't God have Moses prescribe that for us? What Paul wanted them to understand was that Old Testament pattern of living and these payment systems of animal sacrifice and self-sacrifice weren't the final payment for God's salvation system for human debt. Instead, they were kind of like this toy cash register. And parents let their kids play with this toy cash register because there's value in figuring out how money works. The play principles point to the real payment. And as a child, you kind of explore these ideas so that by the time you grow up, you've played with toy money, you've had an allowance to tinker with, and eventually you are ready to handle your own finances responsibly. The play principles of the Old Testament animal sacrifices and self-sacrifices pointed to a real payment that would be accomplished through the work of Christ. It won't be those old lambs from the farm, but it would be the lamb from heaven, the sacrifice of God's Son become incarnate, where he would give his life blood and the forfeiture of God the Son's life for the payment of human sins. This is why we care about both the history, the nativity history, and the incarnation of Christ. Because in this real world, really painful life payment of Jesus Christ, we have the coordinates to divine care. We see that God not only was here in the world, but he was here because he cared about wrong and he cared about redemption. Paul said, God sent his Son so that we might receive adoption to sonship. That what Jesus did accomplished a change in status for us before God. And there are many ways to think of our status before God or a higher power, and most of these ideas in religion or philosophical systems have to do with thinking of ourselves as laborers. Like there's some work we have to do for the boss man God, or for a deep moral principle like karma or a reincarnation wheel. And if we just kind of give our boss what he wants, he'll pay us in return with the wages of our behavior, which is some sort of favor or good karma in return. But the idea of a laborer, while it's found in religious systems where you're told, like, if you go to the headquarters city of this religious scholar, go to Mecca and pray at the box, where a shrine where there's a historical holy event that was said to have happened. If you just make the right field trip, or say the right prayer enough times, or make enough money payment toward this or that virtuous charitable cause, if you just do your work, then God will reward you. However, in the scriptures, we're reminded that God doesn't make bargains or deals or kind of get bought off by attempts at human morality. We're not laborers in contract with a holy God. In fact, the New Testament and the Old Testament of the Christian Bible tell us that humankind is stuck in a place where we can't give our Lord what he demands according to his holy standards. That we are slaves, in effect, that we're stuck in a circumstance that we can't provide what we need to be free, that we are locked with this sin nature in us that refuses to be holy, that we have tendencies toward lies and lust and pettiness and manipulation and revenge and jealousy, that we have capability and instinct sometimes to hurt and be cynical and complain, have fits of rage and arguing. All these things that make the human spirit ugly are instincts that we have that we can't seem to escape. Every generation of humankind has always had these problems in them, which also leads us to the fact that every human generation ends through death. So we're slaves not only to this inner curse of bad morality, but we're also slaves to the reality that our bodies break. The New Testament and the Old Testament of the Christian Bible tell us that that's a state that human beings cannot free themselves of. So we need someone to do the redemptive work on our behalf. And that's why Jesus came, to use his greater power and his greater life worth to address those problems for us. Because of the work of Christ, our sin debt has been paid. Even though we still struggle with sin, God tells us we're forgiven. And even though we still will die, God tells us through Christ we will be resurrected. And these gifts of forgiveness and resurrection are ours not because we labored for them, but because he chose to adopt us as his heirs. And that's why Paul said we are not slaves, but through the adoption to sonship, a status where we have a family relationship with God, we can consider ourselves heirs. What does an heir contribute to gain their inheritance? Well, nothing. You don't work for an inheritance, you just inherit it. You, by virtue of relationship, you're the benefit of somebody else's work. If you have an inheritance from grandpa, it's because what he worked for and he saved and he earned. And then he might give it to you because you're in his family, not because you worked for it, but because he worked for it and he loves his family members. This is a picture of how Christianity works. If you've had the idea that a religious system is about begging God for things or bribing God or trying to make deals with God, that's not what the salvation plan is about. That's not what the Christmas story offered us. Instead, the salvation plan has always been, whether it's the words to Abraham, "To you I will give," or the shepherds that heard the voice of the angels, "To you is born this night in the town of David," or in the Lord's Supper that Jesus instituted, "Given and poured out for you for the forgiveness of sins." Our rightness with God is given to us. We are heirs because of the work of Christ. The Holy Spirit has given us a new relationship with God. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul taught in Ephesians 2, it's by grace, a gift that you've been saved through faith. This isn't from yourself, it's a gift from God, not by works, so that no one should boast. Being a Christian means we have an awareness of a gift that we've been given. We value it and we treasure it, and we trust we're right with God because we know what he did for us in the life of Jesus, in the history of the Nativity, and the powerful implications of the Incarnation. Those are the coordinates to divine care. For when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. I've had manna moments when I came to Florida. What is this funny-looking thing? What does this bumper sticker decal mean? And what's growing on the trees? These manna moments might be the type of moment we'd have to explain when somebody new comes to the state or to the area, to explain to them what these experiences are. That's the goal of our congregation, of our Christian church too, to explain why we love Christmas, what the historical events were, and what this incarnate, God-made human being did that changed our world. This is a story we love to tell as we explain what child this is.